The alien guards dragged the human through the dust-covered corridor as the others watched in silence, their long fingers wrapped tightly around plasma spears, their eyes cold and unreadable. The air smelled like oil and fear, and the only sound was the slow click of boots against metal. The human's wrists were bruised and bleeding, his uniform torn from the fight that had broken out when he realized what they were about to do. They had told him this was a punishment mission, a recon test, a survival drill. But everyone knew the truth. The jungle outside was cursed, alive with a creature older than memory, a predator so savage that even the alien warlords refused to send their elite soldiers into its territory. They had lost scouts, drones, even an armored squad. Nothing came back except torn metal and shredded bone. And now they were sending a single human, one unarmed, dehydrated, sleep-deprived human into that cursed wild, not because they thought he'd win, but because they didn't want him to return. As they reached the final blast door, the commander leaned in close. His breath smelled like sulfur. His voice was calm and cruel as he whispered that they would not wait for him. No extraction, no support, just silence and death. The human stared back without blinking, his jaw clenched so tightly it hurt, and though his heart pounded like a war drum inside his chest, he refused to show fear. Not to them, not now. The door hissed open, and hot air rolled in, thick with humidity and something else. Something that made the skin crawl. The jungle roared beyond the metal frame, thick vines, twisted roots, and the sound of something massive breathing somewhere just out of sight. The guards shoved him forward and stepped back. The door slammed shut behind him, sealing him in with the thing they all feared. And the human stood still for a long moment, just breathing, just listening. Because he knew one wrong step could be the last. He moved slowly through the underbrush, each leaf brushing against his skin like the fingers of a ghost. And though the trees were beautiful in a way, glowing with alien spores and strange colored fruits, it felt like walking through the lungs of something alive. Every branch creaked like bone, every gust of wind carried a growl too low for normal ears. But the human kept moving, his survival instincts on fire, tracking sounds, smells, even the vibration in the ground. He remembered his training, the voice of his old Earth instructor echoing in his mind. Don't panic. Observe. Adapt. Overcome. And as the light above dimmed with the alien sun slipping behind the mountains, the jungle became a maze of shadows and whispers. That's when he heard it. Not a roar, not a snarl, just a breath, deep and long and close. He dropped to the ground instantly, pressing his body flat against the roots, holding his breath as the sound of something massive passed nearby. It didn't walk, it flowed, like smoke wrapped in muscle and instinct. His fingers dug into the soil as his shadow fell over him. Something hot dripped onto his shoulder, burning his skin. He didn't scream, didn't flinch, and after a minute that felt like an hour, the shadow moved on, fading into the darkness again. He stayed still until his lungs screamed for air, then slowly crawled forward, away from the path, deeper into the jungle, because he knew now what he was dealing with. Not a beast that hunted for food, but one that hunted for sport, for dominance, for control. And he needed to learn its rules before he could survive it. Somewhere behind the trees, hidden cameras recorded his every move. Aliens watching from their command tower, expecting to see blood, expecting to see death, placing bets on how long he would last. But the human didn't care, not about their games, not about their cruelty. He moved with purpose. Spotting claw marks on tree trunks, mapping territory, memorizing escape paths, building a mental map of the jungle's bones. And when night fell fully, he didn't panic. He built a makeshift shelter with thick leaves and mud, climbed into the lowest branch fork of a wide tree, and wrapped his belt around the limb and his waist to avoid falling in his sleep. If sleep ever came, because the jungle never went quiet, the chirps, the howls, the low growls never stopped, and underneath all that was something heavier, something breathing, always near. The human knew he couldn't kill it, not yet, not without weapons or traps, but maybe he didn't need to. Maybe he just needed to understand it. Maybe he could find something the aliens never looked for. Something they didn't believe in: respect, connection, survival without submission. And as the stars above shifted and the alien moon rose high, casting violet light across the leaves, the human spotted glowing eyes watching him from the dark. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared back. And the eyes blinked once, then vanished, and that was the moment he realized he wasn't being hunted anymore. He was being tested, and the real trial had just begun. The second day began without light. The alien moon still hung low and heavy in the sky, casting shadows like blades across the forest floor. The human opened his eyes slowly, his muscles stiff and aching from sleeping on the branch, his ears still sharp to every sound around him. Below the tree something had walked by during the night. He could see the broken twigs and deep clawed prints in the mud. It wasn't small, it wasn't slow, and it had circled his tree 3 times before vanishing into the thicket. His heartbeat was steady now, not calm, but focused. He slid down carefully from the tree, landing quietly on his feet. Every step he took, he checked the ground first. No sudden movement, no noise, because in this jungle noise meant death. He moved through the undergrowth, using sticks to push aside the thick alien leaves, watching the colors change from green to red to blue as he walked, each leaf responding to his presence like a living sensor. He found a small pool of water surrounded by tall spiked plants. Dipping his hand in, he tasted it. Bitter but clean. He drank slowly, his eyes scanning the clearing. He didn't know when it would come again, or from where, only that it would. Because he had seen the eyes in the dark, and those eyes had intelligence, not the hunger of a wild predator, but the cold judgment of a rival. Something that watched not because it was curious, but because it was deciding what to do with him. He found claw marks again, deeper this time, along the bark of a massive tree that looked like it had twisted around itself as it grew. The marks were fresh, 3 slashes wide apart, and each cut had bled a thick purple sap that steamed in the air. He touched it with a stick and it hissed like acid. Another sign, another message. The beast marked this as its ground, and he had stepped into it willingly. But he didn't back away. He moved deeper, following the trail not like a hunter, but like a student, learning what the beast left behind, how it moved, how it hunted. He saw bones half buried in the soft soil, not clean, not old, broken, and splintered, crushed under weight or claw, maybe both. He crouched beside them, fingers brushing over the sharp edges, and for a moment he wondered if this would be him by sunset. Another broken skeleton for the next poor soul to stumble across. But the thought didn't scare him. It only made him more aware, more determined. Because if this was a test, he would pass it, not by killing, but by surviving on his terms. He came upon a wide gorge covered in vines. The air grew colder as he crossed, and that's when it happened. He heard it before he saw it. A low growl, like gravel grinding under pressure, coming from behind him. He froze, heart thundering in his chest. Breath held so tightly it felt like he might explode. He turned his head just slightly, eyes scanning the tree line, and there it was, stepping out from between the twisted trunks. The creature moved without sound, its fur black and soaked with dew, muscles shifting like waves beneath the skin, its head low, eyes locked on him. Glowing faintly yellow in the half-light, it had no armor, no tech, nothing but raw power and ancient cunning. They stared at each other, two predators, one raised by Earth's brutal wars, the other shaped by the unforgiven wild of this world. It didn't charge, didn't roar, just watched him, testing his reaction. And the human did the hardest thing he could do. He didn't run. Instead, he slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a ration bar. Tore the wrapper carefully. The scent of protein and salt filled the air. He broke the bar in half and tossed the piece gently toward the beast. It landed softly on the moss. The beast looked down, then back up at him, and for a moment nothing moved. The wind stopped, even the insects went silent, and then it took a step forward. Slow, deliberate, its eyes never leaving his. Another step, then another, until it stood just 3 meters from him. It sniffed the air, the muscles around its mouth twitching. Then it lowered its head and took the food in its jaws, chewing it. Once, twice before swallowing. The human didn't move, barely breathed. And when the beast turned and walked away without attacking, disappearing back into the trees, it left only broken leaves and the echo of its breathing behind. He dropped to one knee, heart racing, sweat pouring down his neck. He had just stood face to face with the most feared predator on the planet, and survived not by strength, but by staying calm, by respecting the beast's space, by offering something without threat. And now he knew it wasn't just a mindless killer. It could think, it could choose, and it had chosen to let him live, maybe not as a friend, but as something not yet worth killing. He made his way back to the shelter he had built the night before, but he didn't sleep. He just sat in the dark, carving lines into the bark of a nearby tree, one for every hour he survived, one for every lesson learned, and one for every rule. He broke by still breathing, because if the beast had spared him once, it meant there would be a second meeting. And next time it might not be satisfied with a small gift. It might demand more, trust, submission, or perhaps something even deeper. And the human would be ready, not with weapons, but with will, because in this place, survival wasn't about who was stronger. It was about who could understand the rules of the wild and twist them just enough to live another day. The third day came without warning as light filtered through the thick canopy above, painting the jungle floor in gold and violet patterns that shifted with every breeze. The human crouched low beside a strange tree with wide fleshy leaves that hissed when touched, marking a trail on the bark with the jagged edge of a bone, his makeshift knife dull but enough to carve a direction he could follow later. The jungle had begun to feel less like a maze and more like a breathing labyrinth. The vines moved subtly. The ground pulsed in some places, the air thicker than it should have been. Every sound carried weight, every silence was a warning. And still the human pressed forward. He had survived longer than any alien expected, and maybe longer than they were comfortable admitting. He knew they were watching him through hidden lenses embedded in trees or disguised as stones. He could feel their eyes like insects crawling over his skin. But he didn't care, because today something had changed. During the night he had heard the beast again, but this time it wasn't alone. There had been another sound, a smaller growl, higher pitched, panicked, and then silence followed by a heavy thud. Curiosity pulled at him like a rope around his chest. So he followed the trail of torn leaves and snapped branches until he came to a small clearing where the sunlight felt colder somehow. And there, half buried in mud, lay what looked like a young version of the beast, its leg trapped beneath a fallen tree, its breathing rapid and shallow, eyes wild with pain. It looked at him with a mixture of fear and challenge, trying to lift itself and growl but failing. The human stepped slowly into the clearing, arms low, no weapons drawn, just his voice low and steady as he whispered words the creature couldn't understand, but maybe the tone carried meaning. He crouched down and studied the tree, thick and wet, roots still pulsing faintly as if the plant was alive, and maybe it was. This planet obeyed rules unlike anything Earth had taught him. He gripped one of the long roots and began to pull, but it resisted like muscle, tightening around the trapped leg as if refusing to let go. The young beast cried out and thrashed, nearly clawing him by accident. He didn't back away, he didn't stop. Instead, he wrapped his arms around the root and pulled again. Harder, teeth clenched, muscles burning, and finally with a sickening squelch it tore free and the log shifted. Just enough for the creature to pull its leg out. It collapsed to the side panting, foam dripping from its mouth. But it didn't run, it didn't bite, it just stared at him, unblinking. And then something moved behind the trees, the sound of a branch bending, not breaking, just bending under weight that was far too heavy for any normal creature. The human froze. He didn't need to see it to know the adult beast was near. Maybe watching, maybe waiting to see what he would do, or maybe deciding whether to strike. But nothing came out, only silence, heavy and watching. And slowly he stood, stepped back from the injured youngling, and left the clearing without turning. His back, walking slowly, each step careful, until the trees swallowed him again. His breath came in short bursts, not from fear, but from awe, because he had just helped the child of the monster that ruled this jungle. And somehow he was still alive. He found an old abandoned supply crate, wedged in the roots of a tree, likely dropped by a scout drone months ago. Inside he found broken tools, rusted rations, and a cracked spear shaft with part of the energy cell still glowing faintly. He took it, wrapped the handle in fabric torn from his uniform, and tested the weight. It was unbalanced, but better than nothing. He strapped it to his back and moved on. The jungle seemed to shift around him now, like it was watching, waiting, deciding what to do with him. Every creature he passed seemed quieter. The birds didn't flee as fast. The small reptilian things didn't hiss as much. And once he even saw one of the glowing monkeys staring at him from above before dropping a fruit at his feet and vanishing. Maybe it was coincidence, or maybe it was something more. By dusk he reached a wide hill overlooking the alien compound far in the distance. He could see it through the fog, lights blinking, ships parked like silent statues. The aliens thought they were safe behind walls and machines. But none of them dared come out here, not anymore. Not after the beast had claimed the jungle. And now the human was starting to understand why. This place wasn't just wild, it was sacred in a way, alive in ways they couldn't measure with scanners or sensors. It responded to emotion, to action, to blood and intent, and he was slowly becoming part of it, like a new thread in its ancient pattern. He built a fire that night with moss that burned blue and sat in silence, eating the last of his dry protein. He looked at the broken spear beside him, glowing faintly in the dark, and then at the trees beyond, where he knew something was watching him, not to attack, not to kill, but to observe, and maybe to understand him in return. He held the broken weapon in both hands, gripped it tight, and held it up toward the trees, a gesture, not of threat but of readiness. The leaves shifted, the wind stirred, and then it stepped out, silent and terrifying, the full-grown beast. The same one he had seen before, eyes locked with his mouth closed, chest rising and falling like a bellows. and between its teeth it held something. A long vine twisted into a loop. A symbol, a gift, or a warning. He didn't know which. It dropped it at his feet and stepped back, vanishing again into the shadows, and the human stared down at the loop. In silence, heart pounding, mind racing, because he knew now that this was not just a creature, not just an animal. This was something ancient and smart and aware, and for some reason it had chosen not to end him, but to give him a sign, and whatever it meant, he had to understand it before it was too late. The jungle was quiet that morning, too quiet, as if everything that breathed had chosen to hold its breath at once. The human sat cross-legged near the remains of his dying fire, staring at the twisted loop of vine the beast had dropped at his feet the night before. He had not touched it, not moved it, only stared at it, trying to understand if it was a threat or a test or a message in a language too old for his kind to decode. The fire crackled weakly beside him, the embers struggling against the damp air, and the broken spear rested across his lap like a symbol of both failure and survival. His muscles ached from days of crawling, climbing, and running, his mind heavier now than ever before, because something had changed, something deeper than just hunger and fear. He wasn't prey anymore, not exactly, and that shift carried weight. He stood slowly and picked up the vine, feeling its strange pulse beneath his fingers like it had once been part of something living. He tied it to his wrist, not out of pride or understanding but instinct. Something in him said this mattered, and sometimes instinct spoke louder than reason. He moved through the trees with more confidence now. Not carelessly, but not as prey either. The sounds around him had changed again. The whispers of the jungle still present, but softer, less hostile, as if the forest itself was watching to see what he would do next. And so he waited. Crouched near a wide pool where glowing fish swam in slow, lazy circles. The water shimmered like liquid glass under the twin moons. And that's where he saw the beast again. Not charging, not hunting, but watching, its form half hidden by thick vines, its eyes never blinking. The human didn't run. He didn't raise the spear. Instead, he reached slowly into his pouch and pulled out another food bar. This one smaller, almost gone, but enough to offer. He placed it on a stone near the water and stepped back, far enough to show respect, close enough to show trust. And then he waited. Minutes passed like hours, and finally the beast stepped forward, muscles rippling under its dark hide. It sniffed the air, head tilting slightly, and then in one quick motion it grabbed the bar in its teeth, backed away, and vanished again. The human exhaled slowly, his heartbeat loud in his ears. He knew this was progress, not just survival, but connection. Weak and fragile, but real. The next day he returned to the same spot with nothing to offer but a piece of fruit he had watched the glowing monkeys eat without dying. He left it the same way, on the stone, and again the beast came, slower this time, closer, and took it. This time their eyes met for more than a second. Something passed between them, not emotion, but recognition, like two warriors on opposite sides of a line that no longer mattered. Over the next days the ritual continued. Offerings left, offerings accepted, sometimes ignored, sometimes sniffed and rejected, but always watched, always judged, and slowly the distance closed. The beast began to circle him instead of vanishing, staying longer after each visit, moving not with threat, but with curiosity. The human began mimicking its movements, crouching low when it lowered its head, tilting his head when it did, making soft clicking noises with his tongue and throat, trying different tones, different rhythms. And though the beast never mimicked him back, it didn't attack either, and that meant everything. On the 6th day, something new happened. He found the beast waiting at the pool before he arrived. Sitting still like a statue, its chest rising and falling slowly, it made no sound as he approached, just watched him with those deep yellow eyes. And when he reached the stone and placed another fruit down, the beast didn't move, didn't even glance at it. Instead, it stepped forward, one step, then another, and then it stopped less than 2 meters from him. So close he could see the scars along its jaw, old marks of survival, and smell the heat of its breath as it exhaled slowly. The human stood his ground, heart thudding so loud he thought it might scare the creature away. And then he knelt slowly, not to submit, but to show something different. Patience, presence, peace, and the beast stepped forward again, its nose brushing against the vine tied to his wrist. The same one it had given him, and in that moment he knew. It was watching to see what he had done with the gift. The beast pulled back slightly, then turned and walked toward the trees, stopping just once to look back, and the human understood. It was inviting him to follow. His legs moved before his mind could stop them. Through vines, under roots, over slick stones and moss-covered logs. They moved together now, not side by side, but not as enemies either. He followed it into a wide cavern hidden beneath a massive tree. The air inside damp and thick with spores that shimmered in the dark, the walls lined with bones and vines. And in the center a pool of black water that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The beast sat near the pool, staring at its reflection, and the human sat too. The silence heavy but not uncomfortable. He watched the creature breathe, its movements slow and calm. And for the first time he realized it wasn't just surviving either. It was mourning, remembering, feeling, something deeper than instinct. And in that moment, the line between human and monster blurred. Later he tried something bold. He reached out slowly, hand flat, and placed it near the beast's massive paw. It turned its head, watched him, and then lowered its paw beside his. Hand without touching, but close enough that he felt the warmth radiating off its body. And that was enough. The next morning he woke outside the cave alone, the beast gone. But beside him lay a fresh kill, a sign, a gesture, a gift. And he knew without doubt that this was not just survival anymore. This was something older, something sacred, a bond that no alien watching from their steel towers could ever understand. The jungle trembled with the storm that hadn't reached the sky yet. The air thick with tension, as if even the trees knew something was coming. The human crouched beside a broken stream, washing blood from his arms, not his own, not today. The gift the beast had left for him still echoed in his thoughts. The kill was clean, precise. The animal gutted and placed gently beside his sleeping form, as if saying, "You are one of us now." But the peace didn't last, because far behind the jungle wall, beyond the glow of spore-lit vines and whispering winds, the humans and the aliens were stirring, their silence no longer passive. The feeds had shown them something they could not accept. The human they sent to die had not only survived, he had adapted, thrived, bonded with the one thing even the aliens feared. And now they were afraid not of him, but of what he represented, control slipping from their fingers. Their tools breaking rules, their arrogance being rewritten. And so they sent the kill team, 6 soldiers bred in cryotanks, covered in chrome armor that hissed with fire and sound. Each one trained to eliminate with precision and cruelty. They dropped silently into the edge of the jungle under cover of false clouds and noise-canceling fields. But the jungle still felt them. The roots pulsed, the wind shifted, the insects vanished, and deep within the trees, the beast raised its head. Ears twitching, eyes narrowing, it didn't growl, didn't move, just listened. And the human who had once feared every crack of twig now stood calmly beside it, hand resting near the creature's massive shoulder, and he whispered words he no longer thought of as human, sounds he had learned by heart from nights spent listening. Copying, becoming, the beast shifted and began to move, low and silent. The human followed, not behind, not ahead, but beside. Two shapes moving like shadow through living roots and glowing moss, toward the intruders who thought they were hunting, but were being hunted. The first soldier died without seeing his killer. A vine wrapped his leg, pulled him into the darkness, and when the others found his body, the armor was bent inward like paper crushed by a hand far too large. The second fell moments later, caught by a sudden silence and a pair of glowing eyes that dropped from above, slashing, vanishing, gone before the scream reached the air. Panic settled into the squad like acid. The commander barked orders. Scanners out, thermal vision active. But the jungle refused to betray the beast. It masked heat, swallowed sound, bent shape. And soon the third soldier found himself alone, surrounded by trees that whispered lies and paths that turned in circles, until the human appeared before him, face covered in mud and war paint made from crushed petals, spear in hand, not to kill, but to speak, his voice sharp and clear. Leave now, or none of you return. The soldier hesitated, lifted his rifle, and then the beast dropped beside the human. Silent and still, its eyes locked on the man in armor, daring him, the rifle lowered, hands raised, and for a second there was peace. But then a shot rang from the trees, not from the one who surrendered, but from the fourth soldier hidden above. The human dove left, the beast roared, and the jungle exploded into chaos. Vines lashed like whips, roots erupted from the ground, birds screamed and scattered, and the beast tore through the trees with fury that echoed like thunder. When the dust cleared, only one alien was left, pinned beneath a root, bleeding, coughing, crying. The human stood above him, eyes calm, body steady. The beast behind him silent and waiting. The alien begged for mercy, voice cracked, saying he was just following orders, that he didn't know, that he didn't mean it. But the human said nothing, just stared, then turned and walked away. The beast followed, leaving the survivor alone in the silence of a jungle that no longer accepted his presence. That night the human sat by the pool again, fire glowing blue, eyes reflecting the stars above, his hands stained with mud and ash, his body tired but alive, and the beast lay beside him, breathing slow, steady, a presence that once meant fear, but now meant purpose. They were more than allies now, more than bonded by food or blood. They were a message, a challenge to everything the galaxy believed, that humans were weak, disposable, predictable, that beasts could not think or feel, or choose. And now both had broken the chains of expectation. Somewhere in the distant towers of the alien command base, the leaders watched the feed through cracked screens and shaky hands, saw the beast sit beside the human, saw the fire between them, saw the one soldier they sent return with eyes wide and voice shaking, repeating the same words over and over. He rides with it now, he speaks to it, it listens to him, and it kills for him. Panic spread among the council like disease. Whispers of old prophecies, of ancient creatures never tamed, of humans who turned enemies into allies and monsters into family. They debated, shouted, tried to erase the footage, tried to deny what they saw, but it was too late. The image had burned itself into every screen, every mind, and soon others would see it, other species, other warlords, other governments that once laughed at Earth's primitive ways. now watching in silence as one human and one beast walk side by side through a jungle no one else dared. Enter. The message was simple, the meaning clear. This human was no longer a pawn, and the beast was no longer a weapon. Together they were something else, something dangerous, something new. The ground trembled before anything was seen. A low, distant rumble that moved through roots and bones like a coming storm. Inside the alien outpost, the alarm stayed silent. The systems detected no ships, no mass signatures, nothing artificial. But the guards on the wall felt it. Their skin crawled, their spines stiffened, and their weapons trembled in nervous hands. Then the first watchman saw it through magnified optics. A shape moving slowly but with purpose through the jungle edge, not crawling or slithering or hiding, but walking tall, unafraid. And beside it walked something smaller but somehow more terrifying. A human, dirty, scarred, wrapped in a cloak made of leaves and bone and fur. And together they moved like they belonged to the same blood, the same purpose, the same storm. The command tower erupted in confusion. Voices shouted over each other, demanding scans, authorizations, weapons to be charged, but the field officers hesitated, unsure whether to open fire on something so primal and yet so controlled. Because the beast wasn't snarling, wasn't charging. It was calm, alert, intelligent. And the human wasn't holding a weapon, but he didn't need to. Because he was the weapon now, forged by the jungle, hardened by betrayal, and carried by something no machine could tame. They stopped just beyond the perimeter fence, and silence fell over the base like a heavy shroud. The beast sat like a statue, its yellow eyes locked on every turret, every soldier, every blinking light. And the human stepped forward, lifting both hands slowly. Not in surrender, but in command. The alien officers stared through reinforced glass, their mouths dry, their hearts racing, because they had sent him to die, and now he was back. Not as a corpse, not as a prisoner, but as something more, something. Free, he spoke then, his voice steady and loud, carried by the quiet wind that moved through the grass like a whisper of judgment. He said he had no interest in revenge, only truth, that the jungle had taught him things no academy could, that the beast beside him was not a monster but a guardian, and that those who lived behind walls had forgotten what it meant to earn life instead of claiming it by force. The silence that followed stretched like a blade, sharp and unbearable, until the base commander responded, his voice cracking over. The comms, asking the human what he wanted, and the answer came without hesitation. He wanted a message sent to every system, every colony, every species that once laughed at the idea of human strength. He wanted them to see what happened when you cast aside someone who refuses to die, and what grows when two enemies decide to trust instead of destroy. There was no reply, only movement. The gates creaked open slowly, metal grinding against metal, and the guards stepped back as the human walked through, the beast at his side, moving with the grace of a king and the silence of death. Every soldier they passed lowered their eyes, not out of fear, but something deeper, something older, respect born not from command, but from presence. The human entered the central chamber where the council stood frozen. Unsure whether to kneel or flee, he did neither. He stood before them and told them what he had seen beyond. Their maps, what he had learned from the beast, that the jungle was not just a place, but a being, a test, a question waiting for an answer, and he had given one, not by killing, not by conquering, but by surviving without losing himself. The beast growled once, soft but deep, and every light in the chamber flickered as if nature itself disapproved of artificial defiance. One of the elder aliens stepped forward, slow and shaking. asking if the human planned to rule the jungle now. And the human shook his head, saying the jungle ruled itself, and he was simply accepted by it, not above it, not below it, but beside it. The council did not argue, they couldn't, because they had no weapons strong enough to match the truth standing before them. So they gave him what he asked, a voice to the stars, a channel to speak to every watcher beyond the reach of trees. And soon the message was broadcast, an image of the human standing beside the beast, silent and still. No words, no banners, just the truth in their eyes and the jungle at their back. And across the galaxy species paused, soldiers leaned forward, leaders whispered questions they had no answer to, and the myths began to grow, tales of the one who walked with the wild, who tamed what was untamable, not with chains, but with honor. And in the weeks that followed, no other force dared enter that jungle again, not even the most arrogant of conquerors, because the path now belonged to the one who returned, not as a victim, not as a conqueror, but as something entirely new. And deep in the night, while others slept behind walls and screens, the human sat beside the beast once more, sharing silence and firelight, both of them watching the stars above, not searching for escape, but listening to the echo of everything they had defied. The jungle was alive with sound, not the chaotic roar of beasts or storms, but something deeper, something older, the kind of sound that pulsed beneath the earth and moved through the air like a song only the wild could hear. The human stood on the high ridge where the trees bowed to no one, the wind brushing against his face like an old friend, his eyes fixed on the valley below where light flickered through the thick canopy. The beast beside him exhaled slowly, its breath hot like a furnace, its body still and alert. They had returned to where it all began, not as outcasts, not as prey, but as guardians of something greater than themselves. The jungle had accepted them both. The paths that once twisted against him now parted for his steps. The creatures that once fled now watched him pass without fear. And the roots that once tried to drag him under now whispered his arrival through the soil. But peace never lasted long in a galaxy built on greed and fear. Word had spread like wildfire, tales of a human who walked beside the untamable, who survived what no other could, who returned from death's door carrying not a weapon but a legend. And soon others came, not soldiers this time, but challengers. Hunters from distant worlds, rich with arrogance and wrapped in armor too shiny to belong to the dirt. They came for trophies, for proof that no human and no beast could defy the rules of nature and survive. The first arrived in a drop pod that cracked the sky like thunder, stepping out with blades made of plasma and a smile that thought itself invincible. He did not last an hour. The jungle swallowed him whole, and no bones were left to collect. The second was smarter, slower, cloaked in shadows and silence, moving like a ghost with every step calculated. But even ghosts cast shadows, and the beast tore him from the trees before he could blink, and when his blood touched the ground, the forest bloomed brighter, as if remembering its own power. The human never interfered. He never needed to, because the jungle did not belong to him. He belonged to it, and he had learned the greatest lesson of all, that power was not in killing, but in being respected by what could kill you. More came after that, from empires and outlaw clans and forgotten moons, each one certain they were the exception, each one thinking they could tame what had tamed him. And each one was proven wrong. The jungle did not want kings. It wanted keepers, not rulers, but guardians who understood the rhythm of blood and breath and silence. And in time even the hunters stopped coming, their stories ending in the same silence that greeted their bones. And slowly the stars forgot how to fear the jungle, not because it was weak, but because it had nothing left to prove. Now he walks not as a warning, but as a myth, seen only by those who are truly lost or truly worthy, the young who stumble into the forest chasing glory and find themselves faced with truth, the broken who crawl into its arms begging for one last chance, and the brave who come not to conquer but to listen. And to each of them he gives the same test: survive without taking, breathe without demanding, respect without asking to be obeyed, and those who do, those who understand, are led back out by paths that shift and open just long enough to guide them home. But those who do not, those who come with fire and greed, vanish beneath roots that move like rivers and vines that whisper in ancient tongues, and none mourn their loss, because the jungle has no room for pride, only purpose. Sometimes he disappears for days, following the beast into corners of the forest even he does not understand, places where the trees glow with memories and the ground pulses with voices too old for language. And there he listens, he learns, and sometimes he speaks, not with words, but with stillness, with presence, and the beast always returns to him. Never behind, never ahead, but beside him, always beside him. Because they are not master and creature, they are balance, they are story, they are law. The aliens who once ruled from towers now send offerings instead of orders, relics of old worlds, seeds of lost forests, DNA from extinct beasts, hoping to be remembered, hoping to be forgiven. And while the human does not reply, the jungle sometimes accepts the gift. And when it does, something new grows, something the galaxy no longer deserves, but might one day earn again. Children on distant colonies dream of the jungle now, not in fear, but in wonder. They draw pictures of the man and the beast walking side by side under alien moons, whispering to trees that bend and listen. Mothers tell stories of a guardian who once stood alone and returned with the heart of a god beside him. And old soldiers lift their eyes to the stars and wonder what it means to be truly free. Deep in the forest where no drone dares to fly and no satellite can see, the human and the beast walk slowly between glowing trees, their shadows long, their steps silent, not as myths, not as legends, but as truth that breathes and watches and waits, because the jungle is eternal, and now so is he, not by immortality, but by memory, by meaning, by becoming the one thing no empire can own, a new alpha, chosen not by blood, but by bond.